yeah, so many things have happened the past week. In the Netherlands, we basically have all our national holidays in 1 week because we have Queen's Day on the 30th of April, Memorial on the 4th of May, and Liberation Day on the 5th of May. So that all happened and it was fun. But what I actually wanted to make a video about were some things that I read in the news lately, and basically they're all about Pim Fortuyn. For those of you who do not know, he used to be a politician that was very much on the rise basically, but he was murdered in 2002, and it was a really big deal because basically in the Netherlands it was like the first political murder since Willem of Orange, which happened in like 1584 I believe. So it was kind of huge. And yesterday on May the 6th, it was exactly 10 years ago, so there was lots of memorial stuff going on. I think he's such an interesting phenomenon for Dutch culture and especially political culture the past 10 years. Even though he wasn't there, he started so many movements that just sort of blew out of control basically. So there are 3 parts that I find really interesting, and the first one I think is the most important, is that ever since he establishes his political party, the whole traditional side of party politics sort of disappeared, because it used to be that many people just sort of stick with one of the larger parties, but ever since he came around you have this sort of moving electorate going from one party to the other, just depending on who they like. He really was the first one to also really point out issues around immigration, and the one that really introduced terms like Islamatization, for example, in the Netherlands. And you know, I think he literally said on certain occasions that he really wanted to stop non-Western immigration, which is another term that he coined. All these things that really dominate political debates these days, but that during the 90s were very, I don't know, nobody dared to talk about it at that time, I think, and he was sort of the first one who brought it up, which gave him this enormous following. However, he was also a bit of a strange person. He was this very flamboyant guy, basically. I feel like he really contributed to creating this sort of culture around him where he was very much the center of everything. I read an article that really compares him to the Great Gatsby, and it's on so many ways that it's really striking. He added a Y to his name instead of the normal Y that we use to make it seem more fancy. For example, the interior of his house that he would call Palazzo di Pietro, even though it was in Rotterdam. And basically this whole sort of nouveau riche culture that he was in, a lot of his friends sort of seemed to use him for more fame or power. And they were all this like multi-millionaires living in this area of the Netherlands where all the rich people live. And that's actually the third strange part, is sort of culture of fame around him. Like nowadays still, there are people who almost attribute sort of like messiah qualities to him. There's like a myth around it, and I think Pim Fortuyn himself really contributed to that. I think he very much felt like he had a calling. In 2002, he was very much on course of winning the elections, but then he couldn't actually be in the elections because he was murdered. His party got really big and was immediately in the government, but it turned out that he was actually very different from the people he sort of had around him, because this whole party were just bickering and just really incapable of doing things. Like, they were really crazy characters. Do you think about stuff like this still, even though it's 10 years ago, you know? And I will see you soon.